Recording. Okay, so good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone, because we're recording this live and there are participants who are watching from all over the world. My name is Kerry Woodruff. I'm the Director of Paleontology at the Great Plains Dinosaur Museum and Field Station in Malta, Montana, and a PhD student at the Royal Ontario Museum and the University of Toronto in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And welcome to the second event for our CENTRUM Paleo Roundtable. It was really fun. The first one we did was great. We had a number of wonderful panelists participate in that, and we had great, it seemed like all the participants who got to watch along from all around the globe really enjoyed it. The whole point of why we're doing this CENTRUM series is, of course, no big news. Of course, everyone around the globe is having to deal with the COVID situation. People are stuck at home, away from work. It's really kind of tough time, and it's been amazing. I don't know anyone who's been checking them out, but there's tons of online digital platforms that different museums have been doing. So like digital gallery tours, other interview processes and things like that. And it's really cool. The problem for us at the Great Plains Museum is we're only open seasonally for just the summer months. And when all of this lockdown started and a lot of other museums started doing some of these other digital events, we couldn't really do that because, I was away in Toronto, what would have been my PhD semester. So I couldn't give a digital tour of our gallery because it couldn't happen. So we wanted to be able to do a program where through our museum, where we could still, engage with the public, or especially our local community as well. Because, in Malta, we're about 2 hours away from the nearest Walmart even. And so, our community, they've loved it in the past when we've had programs like our symposium last year, which quite a few of some of our speakers today were at our symposium last year. So they've really enjoyed when we can bring a lot of paleontologists to these events for our community. And we're recording this. It'll be posted on our YouTube and our Facebook page and our website afterwards, because again, we want people to be able to watch and learn from this throughout the whole time. The way it's going to work, probably, those of you watching this at home right now, you're probably just seeing me talking because the camera's or the program just clicks in on me talking. But what will happen is we have 5 wonderful paleontologists who agreed to help out today. Just in geographical order from left to right, we have Dr. Phil Currie, Dr. Mary Schweitzer, Dr. Kristi Curry-Rogers, Dr. Lacovara, and Dr. Paul Barrett. And what they'll do is it's going to be sort of these mini interview styles. And I got the idea for doing this style of roundtable because I attended a digital event similar a month-ish plus ago. And it's really neat because instead of, the moderator having, these 10 preset questions that everyone got asked, or, your typical audience questions that everyone gets asked, this was a chance where these experts in these particular disciplines, they could really ask the questions themselves, to each other, which I thought was a really neat platform. Paleontology is a very small discipline. Most of us in the field are very, good friends, peers, and colleagues anyway. But some of us are meeting each other sort of for the first time through this event, which is kind of a really neat way, I think, again, to, not for just other paleontologists to, meet and greet each other, but also a chance to kind of learn from each other. So, the questions someone really wants to ask another person. So I think that's really neat. Just sort of kind of a rundown just on how this works. So I just randomly generated who would interview who. So we'll have it that Paul is going to interview Ken. Ken is going to interview Kristi. Kristi will interview Phil, Mary, and Mary Paul. And so what's going to happen is they have 12 minutes. I'm going to time it, and the person doing the interview will do a short little intro on the person they're interviewing. Nothing fancy, just say who they are, that kind of jazz. I'll start the time when your questions start. The way the mic system works with Zoom and stuff, you may not hear the timer, so not to be rude, but if no one hears it and they go over, I may just have to silence your mic. It's nothing personal. I do ask again, just because the way Zoom works, because again, when you have this many speakers, the program wants to focus on a mic. So if Paul and Mary are talking and I cough, it cuts them out and focuses on my microphone. So for all of the people who are not speaking or doing the interview, if you can just hit your little mic button in the bottom left, and that'll mute your mic. And then when the interview's over and your time is up, you just hit your mic on. So we'll do these 10 minutes. And what I'd like to do, something we kind of did, last time was the first, it was learning. But if everyone's okay with it, afterwards, after the time all the interviews are done, if we can do maybe just a small sort of 5-minute follow-up session. So maybe Ken and Kristi are talking and raising really good questions, but maybe that raises a really, Ken says something that Phil wants to ask about afterwards, et cetera. So just kind of a general thing like that. And again, this is meant to be fun. We want it to be a learning experience, but you can ask any questions. Nothing, I guess, is off limits unless the person the person answering the questions doesn't want to answer. It's meant to be fun. It could be something as philosophical questions about science. There could be their research, things, what they thought was their greatest works, things like that. My favorite beers to Star Trek or Star Wars. We had favorite sandwich last time. So, it's meant to be fun for everyone. And again, this is going to be posted on our YouTube and our website afterwards. If you want to check it out, it's greatplainsdinosaurs.org. And anytime if you have questions or comments, want to know more about the museum or the program, you can also email us at dinosaur@itstriangle.com. So we'll get started. Just to double check before we get going, do any of the panelists, y'all have any other questions or things like that before we get started? Okay, everyone's good. Just so the first person asking questions is going to be Paul Barrett. And Paul, what I'm going to do is because Paul will start interviewing Ken, and instead of just being, Paul, but just in case there are, people watching today who don't know who Paul Barrett is, I'm just going to do a short little introduction to Paul, so that way people know who he is. Mary, then when you ask Paul questions, if you have another little intro you want to do for him, that's perfectly fine. So that's good. So if we're all set, we'll get started. So I'm going to do the interview. So our first person asking questions is Dr. Paul Barrett. He's a merit researcher at the Natural History Museum of London. He is a prolific researcher on dinosaur systematics, taxonomy, macroevolution, something near and dear to my heart, a lot of loads of work on basal sauropodomorphs, and something I've known Paul for a few years, just meeting him at conferences and stuff. But one thing he doesn't know that I was always fascinated by is Paul wrote what I think, in my just humble opinion, is the best thought-based paper that I think all paleontology undergrad students should read. And I tell my students that as well. And that's Did Dinosaurs Invent Flowers? So I think it's a great paper as far as like looking at and thinking how getting students to think scientifically, like when we see, big evolutionary concepts, issues with completeness of fossil record, and how do we sort of like connect the dots? And for me, that was actually a big inspiration for like my recent paper on, it was speculative, but the idea of photoluminescence in dinosaur keratinid structures. And I basically framed it entirely around that paper. So it was a big inspiration for me, which was good. So without further ado, Paul.
Thank you very much, Kerry, and that's a really good and nice introduction. So I've now got to do an equally sweet and nice introduction to the interviewee, who I'm very pleased to be talking to, Dr. Ken Lacovara. Ken is currently based at Rowan University, where he's their Dean of the School of Earth and Environment, and he's also director of the Rowan Fossil Park, so he has a lot of major roles at his university. He's probably most famous for his work on giant dinosaurs, probably for his work on things like Dreadnoughtus and Paralititan, but also for his new work on the very latest Cretaceous, what was happening in the hours and days just before the asteroid hits at the end of the Cretaceous, as well as a large number of other issues to do with dinosaur paleo environments and late Cretaceous dinosaurs. So it's a great pleasure to talk to you today, Ken. And other people will also know you from your TED Talk, of course, on why dinosaurs matter. So the fact that you've also got this big public engagement aspect to your work too. But I'd really like to start off today hopefully in the tone that will continue, by asking you what your most embarrassing paleo moment was.
Well, thank you, Paul, for that introduction and for the question that took that south quite quickly. Wow, there are a lot to choose from. Well, probably working in the field in Patagonia. I had torn my field pants, which is common. Went into the town, which was about 4 hours away on dirt roads. Went into the lavanderia, that's the laundromat in Argentina. And I'm not a very good Spanish speaker, but I try. And my Spanish was improving, I thought, at the time. And I was hoping that the woman in the back would be able to fix my pants. And my Argentinian grad student, he stepped up and he was going to do the transaction for me. And I said, no, Lucio, I've got it. So I started in on my Spanish. And what I said, I probably shouldn't repeat in polite company, but it had to do with that I would like to pay her to work not on my pants, but in my pants. So that didn't work out very well, and he was mortified. And but I did get my pants fixed, actually, so it worked out in the end.
So the story, it had a happy ending.
Yes, for me at least.
Excellent, and for everybody else who had to share the field with you with repaired pants as well.
Right.
So yeah, so I thought that would be a nice, gentle start to our interview before getting into anything that was more intellectually taxing. But given you've already mentioned being in the field in Argentina, that segues very nicely into my next question, which was to do with a famous Argentinian animal, which is obviously Dreadnoughtus. And I was wondering, given all your work on giant dinosaurs, do you think that we're close to finding the largest dinosaur ever? And if so, what are the limits on that size?
Well, you know, it's interesting. A lot of the discoveries in the last 15 years or so have produced animals that, if you calculate the mass, and it's difficult to do that, and so some of these are kind of guesses, but they seem to be clustering in the 50, 60 ton range. The problem is that sauropods are sauropod remains that have been discovered are not very numerous, so we don't really have a statistical base for assessing whether we're really seeing some sort of peak or plateau emerge in that. But it does seem to be the case that you know, there are a bunch of dinosaurs in that mass range, and it makes me start to think that maybe we're seeing the plateau. Maybe we're seeing the limits of what is biologically possible for a terrestrial creature. You know, we're never going to know the answer to that. We don't currently know the answer to, you know, what is the largest dinosaur. There's the largest dinosaur that ever existed, and then there's the largest dinosaurs that have been discovered. And of the ones that have been discovered, most are very fragmentary. And to properly calculate the mass of a quadrupedal animal, lots of great data has been collected on living creatures, extant creatures, and it's been shown that the minimum circumference of the shaft of both the femur and the humerus is highly correlative with mass of living animals. And so the best data, I think, comes from ancient creatures, quadrupeds in this case, where both the humerus and the femur has been found. That's a rarity. That doesn't happen in most cases. So if you only have one of those bones, you are making an assumption about the dimensions of the animal, either in the shoulder or the hind limbs. And sometimes you don't have any of those bones. And there's no real math in the literature that turns a vertebra into mass or turns a shoulder blade into mass. You can make some guesses. So we don't really know the answers to those questions, but I think we are starting to see this kind of plateau form. So, you know, could there be an 80-ton sauropod out there? Maybe. Is there a 150-ton sauropod out there? I doubt that.
I think we're now potentially at the stage we have so many giant dinosaurs, particularly from Patagonia, that all seem to be coming out, as you say, at a similar size. Perhaps the best way of deciding that often asked question of who is the biggest dinosaur is going to come down to each of the people naming those dinosaurs playing a game of rock, paper, scissors. And whoever wins gets the biggest dinosaur. I think that's
probably as fair as anything, yeah.
Because I'm not sure there's a more quantitative way of doing it than that. Because these guys are all very, very similar and all must be pushing the envelope of what it means to live like at large size.
They must be. And the problems that come along with being gigantic like that are immense. And, we don't really know how they surmounted those problems. The sauropods, the long neck, long tail quadrupedal animals, think brontosaurus for the listeners, they're essentially walking radiators, right? That long neck and long tail gives them an immense ability to radiate heat into the environment. I think if you scaled up the anatomy of something like an elephant to giant sauropod size, those animals would probably cook inside their own bodies. So these sauropods have this ability to shed heat into the environment. They're obviously extremely efficient with the way they take in calories. Eating was a lifelong obsession with them, and they can stand in one place and sweep out a giant feeding envelope of vegetation without moving very much. So they have a big surplus of what goes in versus what goes out, which allows them to grow to those great sizes. And the biomechanics of these creatures, I think that if you're the size of a dreadnoughtus, if you're 65 tons and you fall over, I think you die. I don't think you survive a fall like that. So they lived hard lives. They did things that no other animals have been able to do in the history of life on Earth. They did things that no human engineer has been able to accomplish in many cases. So they're really astounding creatures.
Actually, what you just said leads me kind of nicely by a segue into my second question, thinking about the uniqueness of dinosaurs in a lot of ways. So given with your kind of public educator hat on, what do you think is the most important thing that learning about dinosaurs contributes to our understanding of the world in general?
Well, I think what's most important about dinosaurs or any creature is that their existence is so improbable, and yet it was, and yet it came to be. And when you look at the history of life on Earth, it's nothing but contingencies. And every one of those pathways we had to take that one particular path in the right order at the right time to end up with the present that we have now. So, you run back the movie of life on Earth and play it again, and it's never going to end the same way twice. And then you can look at dinosaurs and you see, they dominate terrestrial landscapes for the better part of 165 million years. They were cosmopolitan, they were doing great, they were speciose, and then they all died. And, in my view, they all died very, very suddenly, like on a day. And that should be a warning to all of us now. We're facing a very perilous environmental future right now. And, it might seem like, well, things aren't really changing very much. And, humans have been around for a long time and we're always going to be. And that is not necessarily the case. The future is not guaranteed to anyone. And this whole thing can turn on a dime. And what we're seeing during, what's called the Anthropocene, that's basically instantaneous geologically. And, if the great dinosaurs who ruled an Earth era could go out of business in a day, what makes us think that our little species that's been around for 300,000 years is going to persist into the deep future unless we really fight for that future? Because it is not guaranteed to us. And so I think that the dinosaurs, who were these amazing, resilient, adaptable creatures, also serve as a cautionary tale that that things can change, and they can change really fast, and there's no other place to go. Sorry, Elon Musk, but we're not going to move to Mars. There is no planet B. We're on this tiny little lifeboat in space, and all we have is each other. And we need to make this work, or we are going to go the way of the dinosaurs.
That was absolutely perfectly timed, because the 10 minutes are up. That was a great segment. That was wonderfully done. So yeah, so we'll just, Ken, now you can pick it up.
Sure. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce Kristi Curry-Rogers. I haven't seen you in a long time, Kristi, but it's great to see you. She's a vertebrate paleontologist and a full professor in geology and biology at Macalester College in Minnesota. And she got her bachelor's degree in biology from Montana State University and her PhD in anatomical science from the State University of New York at Stony Brook. She studied with Kathy Foster, who is one of the great paleontologists of our day, as well as probably one of the nicest paleontologists that you'll ever meet. And Kristi is an expert in sauropods, but also in bone histology. So she spends a lot of time cutting up dinosaur bones and peering inside and learning what she can about their biology and their life and their growth patterns. And you know, I think she's in an area, along with Mary, where we're really starting to study dinosaurs like a biologist today would study tuna fish or raccoons, like really studying the biology of these animals, which I think is really fascinating. So Kristi, you do study a variety of creatures, but you've specialized in sauropods. And I remember one of your former mentors, Jack Horner, said to me one time, sauropods, I still don't know what they're good for. You know? Now, I think Jack knows what they're good for, but I think what he meant is that they're really hard to work with. They're really hard to excavate. Most are super big. You have found some diminutive examples, but they're hard to work with. They're generally quite fragmentary, and they're difficult to study because you don't have as many other examples to compare them with. So why did you decide to study sauropods, and what do you love about them, and what do you think we can learn from them in particular?
Thanks, Ken. It's really good to see you too. Yeah, I kind of decided to study sauropods as a first-year student as an undergraduate. I first got to Bozeman just at the age of 18, maybe even 17. Mary will remember because we knew each other back then. And my first job at the Museum of the Rockies as an undergrad kind of work study student was to prepare a giant femur from a sauropod that the museum crews had excavated in Wyoming earlier, a couple years before. And it took me a full year to clean one side of that bone because Jack Horner, my professor at the time, gave me a dental pick to clean this giant bone with, and to sort of make sure that I couldn't do anything wrong with dental pick in this giant bone. I had to sit on the floor to prepare it. And at the end of that year, I had a lot of time to think about long-necked dinosaurs because I had been so intimately relating myself to that bone sitting there on the floor of the Museum of the Rockies. And so I went to Jack and said, all right, I'm finished. I finished preparing the bone. And he told me that I had to turn it over and do the other side. And I was like, no, I really think I'm ready to study these dinosaurs. I don't want to prepare them. I want to learn about them. So for me, I think sauropod dinosaurs are some of the most mysterious of all the dinosaurs that we have discovered so far. I think you said it in the last little segment, but they are kind of like a perfect example of a biological impossibility. They don't make a lot of sense. They grow like mammals. They look sort of like reptiles. We don't know what they ate to fuel their fast growth rates and their massive body sizes other than random plants, right? It seems like they're so confusing. And I think that is what has constantly kept me interested in sauropods, is just thinking of them as biological mysteries that I really want to figure out. And, we make one small discovery and it opens a whole new realm of possible questions. And so we're so far from really having a comprehensive understanding of especially that group of dinosaurs that I think, they're so much different than anything that lives on Earth today that I think they really pose a lot of interesting questions. And that's why I love them. And weirdly enough, I will say, because I think there might be some kids in the audience listening to this webcast, I loved sauropods from the time I was really small, and I didn't even remember that I had loved them. But my mom pulled out a paper mache sauropod when I was home a couple of years ago that I'd made as like a third grader. I didn't even remember that I liked dinosaurs that much back then, but apparently I did enough to be thinking about sauropods as a second grader.
How about that? So we all spend a lot of time in our mind's eye imagining what the past was like. And when we're in the field, sometimes we're present and we're looking at the bones and the rocks that we see. But a lot of times, at least for me, and I'll bet for the rest of you, we're traveling in time and imagining what those landscapes were like way back when. If you had a time machine, if you had the DeLorean from Back to the Future, what time would you go back to, and where on Earth would you want to land, and what would you like to learn?
That is a fantastic question. Because I'm a dinosaur scientist, of course, it would be really fun to go back to certain times when dinosaurs were around. I'd love to go back in time to the Cretaceous and see what was happening with titanosaurs and how they were actually making their living. But I think that I would actually really rather go back to the very beginning. I teach a lot of classes at Macalester, where I'm a professor, about the history of life on Earth. And to me, some of the most interesting things are that sort of initial spark of life that we don't really know the answers to. We talk a lot in our classes here about these different approaches that people can take to investigating the origin of life, the sort of abiogenesis approach, where life comes from this sort of like mix of chemicals, and some electricity and some concentration. But we also have talked a lot about sort of reversion engineering some of the most basic life forms on the planet Earth right now to try to understand what the sort of fundamental definition of life is. And I think it'd be really pretty amazing to go back to the time when life was just getting started, back to those times like the Hadean, these really hellacious times on the surface of the Earth when things were hot and crazy and very different, more like Venus or something than like the planet Earth that we're so used to try to understand how that happened, like how that initial spark got rolling, and whether there were things that were different than the life we see on Earth right now at the very beginning. Maybe those kinds of things that we would maybe call extremophiles, these crazy little single-celled creatures called archaeans, these little single-celled organisms that inhabit some of the craziest environments on Earth, like deep pressurized, under high amounts of water, in caves that are super acidic. Like, I want to know where that early life spark came from. And I think I would maybe think about going back to that time in my time machine, if I could make a time machine that wouldn't burn up in that hot, hellish world.
That's fascinating. That's a great answer. As you were speaking about that, I was thinking of, do you think that we will get some of those answers from astronomy, from all the exoplanets that are being studied right now?
Yeah, it's so interesting to follow the sort of Mars rover project to see all of the sort of sedimentary rock structures that they're finding in Mars or on Mars, and also to see the little possibilities of biomolecule preservation that people are recovering there. I think that those exoplanets can give us almost like a snapshot of early Earth, because they stopped evolving earlier in the sort of planetary formation process than Earth did. Earth is a still ongoing, evolving place. So yeah, I think all of those kinds of discoveries in outer space are going to be really, really helpful as we keep trying to understand what life was like on early Earth, for sure.
So I'm going to follow on to Paul's question a lot, because this is actually what paleontologists talk about when they get together. They talk about field stories, and you've spent a lot of time in the field. And no good story ever starts, things were fine and then they stayed that way. So give us your best field story.
Oh man, one of my favorite field stories comes from fieldwork that we did in Madagascar back in the late 1990s. A group of us were going from small village to small village in the middle of nowhere in northwestern Madagascar, and stopping in and asking people if they had seen bones. You know, we're asking local villagers if they'd seen bones. But I think that the tricky thing about working in a place like Madagascar, especially when you're an English speaker, maybe I speak a little bit of French, not great, but I can kind of squeak by, kind of like you with your Spanish, maybe.
Probably better.
But in Madagascar, we're translating English to French, and then our French or our Malagasy colleagues are translating our French to the French that they speak, sort of the dialect that they speak in Madagascar, and then to Malagasy, and then from the dialect they speak as city dwellers in Madagascar to the local dialect in Madagascar. And so we were really confusing a lot of people in these small villages, and we were completely unaware that we were doing this. But we started noticing that as we were walking from village to village, that there was a crowd of people that had started following us. And we didn't know what was going on. And one of our Malagasy collaborators, as we were kind of settling into a camp at night, realized that these people were following us because they thought that we were vampires. We had been asking villagers, have you seen bones? And so all of these villagers were gathering together, following us from village to village, and they had planned to kill us in our sleep because they thought we were vampires. So I think that experience taught me something important about really knowing your environment when you are going into a field area that is, you know, culturally distinctive from what you're used to. After that field experience, I learned Malagasy because I wanted to be able to communicate directly with people and not rely on this sort of telephone game of translation. Yeah, it was a crazy experience. We were lucky to have survived it.
Can you tell us in Malagasy, I am not a vampire?
Oh, man, you know, I have to admit that I don't know if I could pull it out anymore. It's been a while since I had to use my Malagasy. I think it's something about Mehinana Nosi Vampiro or something like that.
That seems like that might be an important phrase there.
Yeah.
With that was, again, wonderful timing. There's 10 minutes are up. See, we're learning new things about each other every day. That's hilarious. Which, see, this is, if I may interject, this is like Circle Coming Complete why it's extra special, because when you threw Jack his Romer party and he and I got lost and stumbled into that vampire bar, like door instead. So it all comes together. It all makes sense. Perfect. Well, all right, Kristi, the floor is yours.
All right, it is my pleasure to get to introduce everyone to Dr. Phil Currie. Phil is one of the founding scientists for the Royal Tyrrell Dinosaur Museum in Alberta, Canada, and is currently a professor at the University of Alberta. And Phil and I have known each other for a really long time. We are not related, though we both have the Currie in our last name. A lot of people think that we're somehow related, Phil. Phil is a person who has done some of the, I think some of the most remarkable paleontological work, you know, of anyone in our generation. Phil was one of the founding members of the Chinese-Canadian project that was one of the first sort of scientific expeditions that included Westerners back into China once China was reopened. And I think, you know, Phil was one of the people responsible for describing some of the very first feathered dinosaurs ever discovered. And so his list of accolades goes on and on and on. But one of the things that I thought that I wanted to start off with, Phil, if you don't mind, is that for a lot of paleontologists that I know from our field, I feel like I know something about their origin story. I've heard something about how they first got interested in paleontology, you know, that they were collecting little rocks next door and making, you know, their own rock collection or their own fossil collection. But I realized as I was thinking about getting to interview you that I don't know your origin story. And I'd like for you just to tell us a little bit about how you got interested in the field as a kid. Did you have mentors? Were your parents really helpful? Just tell us a little bit about how you got excited about this.
Well, Rice Krispies. Yeah, in Canada, we had a promotion with Rice Krispies where they had plastic dinosaurs inside the box when I was 6 years old, and I started to find these things and really got enthusiastic about it. So that's how I got interested in dinosaurs, and I collected everything in the series. It was 8 dinosaurs, and I got everything except the T-Rex. And so I kind of felt there was something in my life that had not been fulfilled at that point. And but when I was 11 years old, I read Roy Chapman Andrews' All About Dinosaurs. And I think up to that point, I loved dinosaurs. And, you know, I had all kinds of dinosaur toys and everything, but I hadn't really thought about it as a career. And I read All About Dinosaurs, which is really more about the American Museum expeditions into Mongolia and China. And so I decided the day I read the book that's exactly what I want to do. And so at 11 years old, I knew what I wanted to do. By 12, I realized that all of the dinosaurs in the Royal Ontario Museum were from Alberta. And so I knew I wanted to be a dinosaur paleontologist in Alberta. And then I just set my mind to it. And all of my education was sort of pre-planned because I talked to paleontologists. They told me how I had to do it and what I had to do. And not that I was unrealistic about it, because I realized that at that time there was probably only half a dozen jobs in the world where people got paid to work in paleontology on dinosaurs. And so I didn't think my chances were very good. But I still set my mind on moving to Alberta, number one, and also taking maybe a job as a biology teacher or something like that, and working on dinosaurs when I could do it. And the bizarre thing was that I planned it so well that everything backfired. Fundamentally, I got into university and I was going to take my time because I realized there were no jobs out there. You might as well spend extra time there, right? Get more publications and figure things out. Get your name out there and get as much experience as possible with preparation of fossils. So I'd volunteer at the museum and get into the field when I could and so on. And then I started my PhD program after finishing the master's. And after 1 year in my PhD, I hadn't completed my residency yet at McGill University. I got a job in Alberta. And I was up against people who were a lot more qualified than me in terms of getting the job, but I was the only one who wanted to work on dinosaurs because dinosaurs really weren't popular at the time. All these other people wanted to work on fossil mammals and so on, but the museum in Alberta, what is now the Royal Alberta Museum, at that time, they had mammal paleontologists trying to collect dinosaurs, and that hadn't worked out very well because he really wasn't inclined to do that. And they decided they really wanted somebody who was going to go out and collect dinosaurs for them. So then I ended up moving to Alberta after 1 year of my PhD program. It took me 5 more years to finish my PhD in my spare time. Before I got my PhD even, we had filled up the storage areas in the Royal Alberta Museum and basically had plans now to build the Royal Trail Museum of Paleontology. And so it was just like this incredible fairy story. We just went from step to step to step. And it all started off with Rice Krispies.
I love it that, two things about this story really stand out to me. I think that the idea that you were missing the Tyrannosaurus Rex from your Rice Krispie dinosaur collection, and that you've spent your career collecting a lot of really important theropod dinosaur specimens that have really changed the way we understand theropod diversity and evolution is amazing. Number two, the fact that you read Roy Chapman Andrews' book at age 11 and then headed to Mongolia and China, where you have had a long history of continued work there, it just feels like kind of coming complete, like full circle, connecting the dots from childhood to adulthood. So I want to know what out of all the things that you still want to know about dinosaurs, what is the number one thing you most wish that you could answer about dinosaurs? And how would we get that answer? Would it require more discovery in the field, more discovery in the lab? What kinds of discoveries would need to be made to get that answer that you're most questioning about?
I think, you know, I've always been very interested in dinosaur behavior and what they're capable of doing. So for me, there's no big question to answer. The, you know, question of dinosaur extinction is one, but it's such a big problem, and I think there's going to be so many discoveries that are going to be that really need to be made in the field and in the lab both, that in my lifetime I gave up a long time ago, thinking that we could ever do anything with what happened to the majority of dinosaurs at the end of the Cretaceous. I think we, you know, we just have such a limited view of the sites even in the world, and what's going on at the different sites, even here in Alberta, where we think we can look at it and we can see that there are some patterns, but the patterns are local patterns. They're not international patterns. And we really don't know what the big picture is. So I think that dinosaur extinction is beyond what I feel we can do anything with in a meaningful way at this stage. And it's going to probably take generations of research to get to that stage. So the behavior and success of dinosaurs, though, has always been a lot more interesting to me. And you know, we find sites in Alberta where we get the mass death sites of ceratopsian dinosaurs, tens of thousands of animals in some cases. The Albertosaurus site was fantastic, more than 20 Albertosaurus in one single bone bed. And it doesn't make sense in any context but the fact that those things were together at the time that they died, because it's juveniles right through to adults, and there was nothing else mixed in with them except for one hadrosaur. There's similar sites like this elsewhere in the world, but of course, every time you look at anything and it becomes slightly controversial, then people get into it and say, no, you're wrong, you didn't think of this. And that's part of the fun of paleontology. So fundamentally, though, I would love to go out and find other sites like the Albertosaurus site that maybe showed the same kinds of things for Dromaeosaurus, maybe Utah raptor now, which it seems to be producing some pretty incredible material. Maybe that'll be the answer as far as the raptors are concerned. But other groups of dinosaurs as well. I think dinosaurs just had amazing capabilities. I don't think that they're amazing in the sense of what modern animals can do, from fish right through to mammals. They do it. But trying to prove it to everybody's satisfaction with dinosaurs is a very difficult thing. And I'd just like to take another step in that direction rather than trying to solve a big mystery.
Do I still have time for one more, Carrie?
You got a little over a minute, so yeah, you can.
Only a minute. Okay, I'll ask you an easy one then. So you've worked with a lot of students over the course of your career, and I'd like to know how working with students inspires you.
Oh, it inspires me because I really feel that students are the ones that come up with real novel ideas and novel approaches. And so for me, being able to teach and have graduate students is just the perfect ending to my career. I mean, I've spent most of my career, of course, in museums, building museums, working with museums, building collections, and so on. But that was one of the things that was always lacking at the museum. I could have students through the University of Calgary, but it was kind of remote, and I was never really completely in charge of them. And they're thinking, and I wasn't having that daily kind of interaction that I have now with students. And to me, students keep you on your toes. Basically, they're going to be the first to challenge you on anything. And but secondly, they have energy that they can take projects that over the years I've accumulated hundreds and hundreds of projects as well, and I can turn some of these projects over to students, and the students will take them forward and actually finish them in record time. And I'll think, wow, why did it take me so long to do this? But, you know, the interaction with the students has just been absolutely wonderful for me. No question of that. And I'm very proud to see that many of them are doing very, very well in their careers now.
Thank you, Phil.
That was perfect. You guys are all on the ball today. I appreciate the timing. Has been exquisite so far. That's been good. So thank you for that. And Phil, the floor is yours now.
Well, I get the great pleasure of introducing Mary Schweitzer. And Mary and I have known each other for many years, and I won't say how many years because that would divulge how old I am. And Mary is one of those people who, when I first met her, like Kristi, she was a graduate student in Montana State, and working with Jack and doing just amazing things. And at that time I was at the Terrell Museum. She managed to tear herself away a few times and come up and work with us in the field, so we got to know each other very well. And she just had this enthusiasm and approach to research that was, I think, very novel at the time, although it's the kind of thing that Jack always encouraged in his students, to take novel approaches and do things that were very interesting. And this sort of peaked in 2005, and I realized she published things before that about soft anatomy of dinosaurs, but the medullary bone and the Tyrannosaurus rex was an absolute watershed as far as I'm concerned in terms of our thinking about dinosaurs and what you can find in dinosaur fossils. And it got people thinking in an entirely different way. And I know that she had a lot of trouble at the time because I think Mary's one of those people who loves to do great things and interesting things. And people, of course, like to learn about the wonderful things that she's doing, but she doesn't particularly like to go on stage. And so being on stage and in one of the most exciting discoveries of the time, with tremendous potential for future studies and everything, I think wasn't exactly where she wanted to be at the time. But it led to a position at North Carolina State University, and since that time she's continued to produce these incredible papers and incredible students, working on soft anatomy of dinosaurs. I think more than anybody else, she's managed to show that this is something that we should be looking at, that there is something there. And she's convinced a lot of labs around the world that it's a subject worth studying. And because people are now looking at it, they're making discoveries worldwide. Mary's not on all of the papers, but she's really at the heart of all those papers. And so it's a very great pleasure for me to introduce Mary. Hi, Mary.
Hi, Phil, and thank you. I think you way overrated it, but thank you anyway. It's been interesting.
So what do you think about Jing Mei's paper where she described Avimaya Schweitzeri last year?
I was shocked. I was shocked. That was an incredible honor, and I sure wasn't expecting it. So I didn't find out about it till after the talk, but yeah, that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's very cool. I will never forget when I met you for the first time. Do you remember? 1992 SVP. And you were this superstar clear up here, and I was this peon little graduate student, but I had a million questions. And I'll never forget, you didn't owe me anything. And you sat down, we sat down cross-legged on the floor by the posters, and I asked you 9 million questions, and you were so patient. And I've never forgotten that, one of the true gentlemen of paleontology, so.
Yeah, not a single one about blood vessels.
Well, maybe not then, but. Yeah.
Well, I should ask you about your cautionary tales, because you're one of the most cautious scientists I've ever met in my life. I mean,
That's because I'm terrified.
Yeah, I know. That's a good thing. But these days, of course, there's an awful lot more labs worldwide who are doing this kind of work. And but sometimes I think that they don't have the same kind of caution that you do. That they're not. They're making assumptions based on work that you've done in the past and other labs have done in the past, and now they're building on those assumptions. I was just wondering how you feel about the kind of work that's going on right now. So I suspect that if you were directly involved in it, you probably wouldn't do it yourself.
It's kind of hard. I mean, my philosophy has always been people way smarter than me have said this isn't possible. And so if I'm going to make this claim that blood vessels persist or that osteocytes persist, I better have 9 million lines of evidence. And I think the thing that's frustrating is now I see people using one method that isn't very specific and making all these ginormous claims. And you're right, I would not publish some of the stuff that's been published. I think it's a great start, but I think in this area that is so controversial, we cannot be too careful. And while I think that a molecular approach to vertebrate paleontology is, I think it's exciting, but I'm weird. But, you know, I just think that it needs to be approached with more caution than a lot of people do. But on the other hand, it's really exciting to see people, again, smarter than me, taking this ball and running with it. That's not something, I mean, I just like to play with dinosaurs. And it's really, really exciting that other people see some value in this approach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's pretty amazing because as I see it, it really is the area that students seem to be moving into these days too. I mean, a certain percentage of them anyway. Yeah. But it's just something that would have been very hard to predict. It was like when Jack started doing histology, for example.
Exactly. And I was really lucky to be in Jack's lab because of all the paleo people out there. He's one that says he'd rather learn more about the life of the animal, I guess, than about having one more dinosaur for display. And so if you needed to destroy it, destroy it. But on the other hand, when I walked across the lab with a half of a femur I was preparing and I dropped it on the floor, that kind of got a little bit put aside for the moment. So I think I horrified it more than anything. So.
Yeah. Well, that brings us to another matter, and that's fieldwork, because I know you like fieldwork as well.
I do.
And this summer, I suspect, may be a little bit dampened the way things are going, at least with most of our universities and institutions. But were you planning on doing any fieldwork this year? Is it something that you still enjoy?
Oh, yes. If anybody will take me, I will go. The problem is that I have absolutely no sense of direction and I'm totally oblivious to the world around me. And so I get lost, I will lose my students. And so I usually try to hook up with somebody that is going out already and knows what they're doing. And I've been really fortunate to be able to go out with the Museum of the Rockies crew. And then we're trying to develop a little bit more research with some of the people I work with at NC State. So the idea was a couple different times getting out in the field. We want to go back to a site we found previously and explore it a little further. And so I did have plans. I had a lot of plans. So we'll see if any of those actually come to fruition. But I love, love, love doing fieldwork, and I wish I was better at it than I am. But I'm really glad if people like you guys will take me out with you every now and then. Put up with my dumb questions.
Do you have a favorite field story?
Oh gosh. Well, I can't, I'm sure that I've got more fun field stories than this one, but last year I am absolutely phobic of ticks. I cannot breathe when I see them. If they get on me, you probably can attest, I lose it completely. And of course, where the dinosaurs are out here, there's a lot of ticks. So I read this thing online that if you put Vicks Vapor Rub on your legs, the ticks can't get in. They don't like the smell and it's all slimy. So last year when I was out in the field at the Museum of the Rockies crew, I smelled like Vicks Vapor Rub all summer. But I was the only one in the field crew that did not get a tick. Yeah, I don't care about rattlesnakes. They're fine. They give you warning, but ticks will do me in. So
yeah, ticks are one of my paranoias as well. And in your travels to Asia, have you ever experienced camel ticks yet?
yes. Oh my gosh, that is like my worst nightmare. Because I was there in Mongolia with the BBC crew, and we were all sitting in between shots. And I'm sitting in the back of a Jeep, and I look over and I see this like blonde monster walking across the seat back towards me. And I didn't think too much about it because I forgot I was in Mongolia and they have camel ticks there. And when I realized what it was, I absolutely could not talk. I couldn't even scream. And it was walking right towards me, and the producer comes and says, "Okay, we're ready for you." And I could not move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even get a word out. And I'm just like pointing at this ginormous bug. Oh, yeah, but I have definitely heard camel tick stories.
Yeah, absolutely. They're horrifying.
Yeah, I don't even want to go there. No.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Okay.
But I do actually remember a field when you and I were out in the field together, and you thought you found a baby tyrannosaur. Remember that?
Yeah, I do.
I've never seen you jump so high and throw your rock hammer in the air. That was really fun. I think sometimes, we think that by the time you get to be at your level in paleontology, all you guys, all the excitement is gone. And that was one thing when I just realized it's still magic for you, even though you're at the top of your game. So that was kind of fun.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take it in a different direction. Future of dinosaur paleontology. We've been very lucky in that it's been basically a growth industry, we'll say, for the past 40 years or so. And but with things like the pandemic and changes in museums, changes in ways people are educating other people, and so on, what do you feel about the way things are going? Are things going to change, or do you think things will continue to move in that direction?
I am exceedingly passionate about the future of paleo because I think it is absolutely crucial to our own future. I don't think you can say one thing or make one prediction about the future if you don't study the past. And it's hard because, as y'all know, vertebrate paleontology is not well funded. And more people going into vertebrate paleontology means less and less dollars for all of us. But I think we need, as a group, to be a lot better about communicating why it's important to understand these creatures. They reign the earth far, far, far longer than the human species has or will. How did they do it? And from me, with my weird perspective on things, it's a molecular question. How did they fill their niches? How did they attain rapid growth? How did they attain this massive size? All of these things have to do fundamentally with their molecular makeup, their genes, their proteins that they express. If they were alive, we could ask some of those questions. But if everybody says they'll never recover these molecules, then we don't get funded to look for them. And then who knows what the potential is. But I think that they have so much to teach us in every area. And we're just, I think we've spent 300 years saying, well, we can never know that about dinosaurs. We can never know that about dinosaurs. And you know what? If you don't look, you're right. But if you look, who knows what you're going to find, and start, thinking outside the box. I think that's crucial. And we need to do better at making our students challenge us, because I know I don't know everything, and I've got students who are smarter than me. And, it's a little uncomfortable, but that's the way the field needs to go.
And with that was good timing. So we'll get just in a moment to our next one. So far, things have been good. Just to answer a question, just because I don't know if anyone can see in Pops, but yes, Ray Burnham, it is a live event. We are live. that's been asked multiple times. So some people emailed me some other questions, and just because this isn't like a traditional like audience members asking Q&A, I might answer some of those because they're really simple questions at the end. So with this, Mary, I'll hand the floor off to you to interview Paul.
Okay, so hi, Paul.
Hey.
We have not ever officially met face to face.
We have not.
But oh my gosh, I am so impressed with your publication record and the outstanding, stellar contributions you've made. So I'm just reading a little bit from your page. You got your bachelor's and your PhD from the University of Cambridge. So I'm impressed with that, just because some of my favorite people in history come from Cambridge. And then the cool thing about Professor Barrett is you work on all kinds of critters. You work on turtles, you work on pterosaurs, you work on big sauropods, you work on theropods unwillingly. So I wanted to ask you, what is your favorite critter of everything you've ever worked on?
Probably of everything I've ever worked on, my heart's really with the small ornithischian dinosaurs. They're just cute, you know. There's no real academic reason for it. They're just cute. They're basically, to me, like, you know, you get those little forest deer, things like duikers and dik-diks. They're basically the dinosaur equivalent of that. So big eyes, probably big eyelashes. They're kind of Disney bunny dinosaurs, and I'm a big fan of those little ornithischians.
Okay. What is one misconception about your body of work that you want to correct?
One, I think most people would probably say that my body of work in itself is a misconception about everything else.
I can relate.
So that's a really hard one to answer. In terms of, I don't know, people's misconceptions, I think people are fairly honest about whether they like it or not. So I don't know if they misconceive it. I think possibly the stuff that actually Kerry mentioned earlier, my work that's been related to things like dinosaur and plant coevolution. And although I really like the ideas that dinosaurs might have affected plant evolution, I really, really like the idea. I find it very hard to work out how we might prove that and how we might actually prove those causations to get to that point. And I think most of the papers I produce there with the various colleagues I've worked with on that question have all basically said, hey, this is a neat idea, but be careful, we're not sure we can prove it. And I see those papers cited a lot by people saying exactly that dinosaurs and plants co-evolved, which is precisely the opposite of what those papers intended to say. So I think those are probably the papers that get cited most for the wrong reason. In that they think just from the title that I must be saying, yeah, dinosaurs and plants clearly evolving together, clearly influencing each other, whereas all of those papers say, actually, we can't say that these things are going on, even though they're neat ideas.
So I have this question, and I'm going to ask it of you, but Kristi could chime in too. Sauropods, I agree, are mysterious, incredible, magic animals. And so I guess two questions that I have are, number one, how the heck did they maintain that growth rate and that body mass on a plant diet with skinny little heads and really long necks and very weak jaws with weakly rooted teeth? We don't have anything like that today. I mean, all of our herbivores are things like horses, and they have these like massive jaws, and they're so that's one question, and kind of sort of related to that is, why don't we have anything like that today? I mean, they reigned the planet for so long and were so successful. You would think that if they got wiped out, eventually somebody would move into that ginormous plant-eating niche. And the closest we can come is an elephant. So those are
I think they're both really good questions, really, really good questions, and ones that I think are driving a lot of the work that's being done on sauropods at the moment in terms of thinking about their physiology, thinking about how they work from an engineering point of view, and also about how they work from an ecological point of view. There's a lot of discussion about how many individual sauropods might be living in an area, for example, given these things must have been eating hundreds of kilograms of food a day. And potentially in some places where you wonder where they're getting those plants from, because the environments don't look particularly verdant or particularly lush. And you see old reconstructions of kind of the Morrison Formation of giant herds of these things stomping around. And I think they just have to be wrong. And that these animals are probably nowhere near as common as things like elephants were at their historic peak. These are probably animals that were relatively low population density just by sheer dint of the amount of food they're going to have to eat.
But what about Acoma Wable?
Well, I think you get some places where maybe you've got concentrations of these animals. Maybe you've got areas like nesting grounds, communal feeding areas, breeding areas, things like that, where they come together from time to time. But given the energetic requirements of these animals, I suspect they simply weren't as common as we tend to think they are. They just can't have been that many. And you're right, how do you get 200 kilos of food stuffed in a mouth, fueling an animal that weighs 30 tons when its mouth's only 30 centimeters wide? You know, these things must be eating all the time, must have had pretty good digestive systems and low metabolic requirements. These are animals that I suspect weren't sprinting, they weren't moving around an awful lot. But they're still really good questions. They just push at the envelope of what an animal can do at those sizes. And I think mammals simply can't do it because they have a much higher metabolic furnace going. They're constantly burning stuff. They can't do anything about that. And as a result, they just simply can't fuel bodies that are that big. So I think it's big dinosaurs are simply doing something that mammals can't because mammals opted for a different set of strategies.
But why didn't crocodiles?
Well, at the moment, we don't even have any big plant-eating crocodiles, really. And I
Yep.
think eating plants is probably the key to gigantism to some extent. We do get big theropods, obviously, things like big tyrannosaurs and whatnot, getting big animals, but they're not getting past, as far as we know, the kind of 6-7 ton range in terms of size.
Yeah.
So things like the animals that Ken works on, like Dreadnoughtus, are an order of magnitude larger than that.
Yes.
And as a result, I really think herbivory is actually a key to that big size. We're effectively looking at giant walking fermentation tanks on legs. And it's that combination of eating plants and not having a mammal-like reproductive, but having reptile-like, if you like, reproductive systems that allow them to lay lots of eggs, that means that those kinds of guys can walk around. So I think there's an interesting interplay of all the different aspects of their biology that bear on that, but I don't think we're anywhere near an answer yet.
Well, one of the things that kind of drives me, and in a perfect world, this is a project I'd love to do, is I see it as two possibilities. Either the plants were more nutritious than they are today, which we don't have any evidence for, or these dinosaurs had a gut fauna that was much more efficient at retrieving nutrients from the plants that they ate. And from my weird and limited perspective, those are both molecular questions that I think eventually, when we have the tools and mechanisms and technology for it, I think those might be able to be answered. And that's one of the most exciting things for me, is if they had an enzyme, if these dinosaurs produced an enzyme that broke plants down more efficiently, that would be an important thing for us to learn. And so that's really cool.
I mean, one of the things that we haven't done very much, to be honest, is think about using birds as models for dinosaur herbivores. So we use birds as models for lots of things to do with dinosaur biology now.
Yeah.
But because there are relatively few, if you like, grazing birds, we haven't done an awful lot of work of bringing that literature or that work on living birds that eat mainly grass or mainly leaves, things like geese, hoatzins, into the mix. And actually thinking, can they tell us something about those? So that's another step that's still waiting, looking at the physiology of those living animals, which I'm sure has been done in some cases, but it hasn't yet filtered back into that kind of paleo perspective. And it could be, it sounds really kind of a weird thing to say, but actually knowing how good things like geese are at digesting grass might actually have quite a lot of interesting implications for how good herbivorous dinosaurs were at building large bodies.
Agreed.
And that link hasn't been made yet.
That's an important question. So, Carrie, how am I doing on time?
You got a little under a minute and a half left.
All right, so now's my fun question for Paul. You quoted to me in an email, I am also well known for my distaste for tyrannosaurs.
This is exactly right.
And that's heresy. How can you not like tyrannosaurs? So explain that, because I'm a tyrannosaur fan.
It's basically because they suck up all the oxygen from all the other dinosaurs. There are a couple of things that have big sharp pointed teeth, big sharp pointed claws. They're basically fanboy dinosaurs, right? So they are the kinds of things that suck all the energy out of debates about all the other 1,000-odd species of dinosaurs that are interesting. And it's not because I hate them as animals, it's because I hate their PR. They have such, if they were on Twitter, they'd have millions of followers and they'd be like the Kardashians of Twitter. And that, to me, in itself, suggests that they should not be anyone's favorite dinosaurs. So that's basically why.
Yeah, but you know, they're more closely related to those living birds you want to use for models than they are to sauropods. So
But
there
you
you
want
go.
to talk about interesting theropods, though, therizinosaurs. I'm a big fan of therizinosaurs because
Okay.
they learn to eat plants, right? So theropods that ate plants are interesting theropods. Theropods that didn't eat plants, with all due deference to Phil, are basically all doing the same thing.
Well, yeah, you have a point there. I would have to agree with you on that take about tyrannosaur publicity, but your distaste for tyrannosaurs does not extend then to all theropods, just to tyrannosaurs.
It's a lot of theropods, to be fair, but it is very specifically tyrannosaurs are out on a little podium of their own as things that I really find very irritating.
Oh, that's funny. So, last question is, what one question do you have that you wish I would have asked?
Oh, I don't know, actually. Maybe something like, is it time for a beer?
Okay, I'll buy that.
It is beer time, at least being over.
It's for my time, it's perfect time for a
At
drink.
least one of us.
Maybe a bit early for you guys.
Anyway, no, that was fun. And that was perfect timing. That way, Paul's Tyrannosaur comments, this is what he'll be hunted on for social media now. It could have been worse. He could have said something about Spinosaurus and then he would have been doomed on social media. That's for certain. No, so that was fun. Gosh, that was a hoot. I learned a lot about all of y'all, which is really fun. I hope y'all learned fun things about each other as well. Just kind of a few little kind of follow-ups or comments before the last little post-question session, if that's okay. Something I hadn't even realized, because I just randomly generate, do these. I assign everyone a number, pick it for each session, and this is what comes out. But Mary, you haven't published on sauropods, right?
Not yet.
Right. I know I've given you samples.
Yes.
So all of the rest of us have published on sauropods, even Phil, one of my favorite sauropod papers of all time. So, gosh, we should have done a sauropod themed one, which is good.
I'm hoping that Mary and I publish on sauropods kind of soon.
I would really, really like that. We're working at it. It's just, as everybody knows, you got too much to do and too little people helping. So, I mean, in a perfect world, I would assign 12 students to these different projects. But, we're really limited as to who we can take on. But I want to, and the sauropod can that you have that through Elena, we have great plans for that. So I have way more questions than I have money. Let's just put it that way. I think everybody's.
That'll probably be my greatest professional claim to fame, is I got Jack Horner's first sauropod paper, so which I'm sure he'll be bitter about. I know Kristi and I were vying. Kristi and I always joked we'd name a sauropod after Jack, but then we were afraid he would abandon us, which is good. So yeah, that worked. That was kind of fun. Someone had asked a previous question. They emailed me, but it was just, I think it was when Paul and Kim and you two were talking about why we don't find big titanosaur, or, a lot of big sauropods, why they're so fragmentary. And just to answer that question, of course, Mary can school all of us any day on the week over the emerging complexities of the fossilization process, but sort of historical textbook answer, right? To enter the fossil record, you have to be buried, right? You can't just leave a skeleton out and you boom, coming back in the DeLorean. There's a dinosaur skeleton standing on the ground. So can you imagine the sediment required to bury an animal that's 100 feet long, 60, 80 tons, right? So it's like what bits we do get to bury do get buried are just these little pieces. There's other things like probably, taphonomic processes like scavenging and, disarticulation of them whatsoever. But, that's no probably pun intended, big reason is just, again, the chances of being buried. It is a wonderful plug, I will get to say, for the Dinosaur Museum for the summer. We do a new exhibit that we build every year, and you're doing an exhibit on Amphicoelius fragilis, the biggest dinosaur that never existed. So that'll be the teaser for that, which is fun. But yeah, so these last 5 minutes, I kind of wanted to open it up to all of you speakers. So if everyone, if y'all want to turn your mics on, and maybe there were, again, maybe Ken has a question for Phil or vice versa, or someone has another question. Just, I want to open it up to the floor for a couple minutes for y'all to, if you have any questions that you wanted to ask the whole group, or someone that, maybe you didn't get a chance to interview with.
I have a question I'd like to ask Ken that I didn't manage to work in. Viewers won't realize that Ken is actually sitting at a drum set, and that he's a professional jazz drummer. And I would like to know if Ken has ever managed to work his drumming expertise into any formal paleontological activity.
Well, I always take a pair of sticks with me when I travel, and I have always found a way to play when I'm on an expedition. So in Egypt, where I spent a few winters in the Bahariya Oasis looking for another Spinosaurus, I fell in with this group of Bedouins, and every night I would go to their tent and I'd play the tabla drum while they danced around. I played with a street band in Buenos Aires. I played with a funeral band in China. So it's great, and a lot of times I can't talk to these people because of the language barrier, but you can communicate with music. And I found, especially when you're traveling around, like in Europe, all you have to say is, I'm a jazz drummer from Philadelphia, and they're like, let's go, because Philly has cred in the jazz world. I've got a question for Mary. We've shared some students in the past. We've had students who've gone back and forth between our labs, and molecular paleontology is a really hard science to do. It's expensive. The learning curve is really high. You have to understand lots of different disciplines to be engaged in it. Do you see a time when the barrier to entering the field and the barrier to making progress in the field is going to lower, so you don't have to be hyper specialized to be in molecular paleontology? Or will we have a time when it becomes more of a tool that's accessible to more people?
I certainly hope the latter. I don't know, because I didn't plan this. It just sort of happened. And so, I think I'm one of those weird scientists that I can't learn. I hate chemistry. I hate genetics. I find them boring, except that I need them to answer my fundamental questions, and I can learn anything in that context. And I think that's what is required, is start with a question and then figure out the tools that you need to answer it, rather than saying, I'm going to be a molecular paleontologist and trying to answer, all of those things. I think that students will not be passionate unless they are question driven. And one of the most valuable things I got out of working with Jack Horner when I was a graduate student is when I first showed him those little round red things inside the blood vessel channels of a thin section of bone. He looked at him for like 20 minutes under the microscope, growling the whole time. And then he looked at me and he said, so what do you think they are? And I said, well, they're the right shape, the right size, and the right place to be blood cells, but everybody knows they can't preserve. And he said, prove to me they're not blood cells. And I think that's one of the fundamental things we don't teach our students enough, is it's not the role of a scientist to prove. It's our role to disprove. And if you take your favorite pet hypothesis and try to disprove it before anybody else can, you remove an element or a layer of bias. And I think it makes your science more objective. And so I think molecular paleontology is really, really good for teaching that kind of an approach.
I think one of the other things that paleo is good for too as well is also that bringing together of lots of different ideas at once. You bringing ideas in from modern biology, from whether it's from ecology or physiology, and looking at the sedimentology of the rocks that the things come from, looking at these things from the macro anatomical scale through to the molecular scale. And there are relatively few other areas where on a day-to-day basis, I think people think that broadly. And that's partly obviously because the clues that we have are less viable. Like the evidence we have is less. Because the animal's largely gone, we're just left with bits of it, we're left with not all of the ecosystem it was in. And so we have to use those extra clues, those contextual bits of information, in a way that I think our colleagues in, quotes, harder sciences simply don't have to think out the box in that way. Things like CT scanning. Who'd have guessed that something that was invented to look at airplane parts and people's hip replacements would revolutionize what we know about the evolution of the brain in hominids or something like that. So I think we're lucky in that we do work in one of those areas that we can have a lot of fun with mixing those things together in ways that colleagues of ours who might be, I don't know, amazing nuclear physicists or industrial chemists simply don't.
I agree with what you're saying, Paul. And I think that, I don't remember who asked this question earlier, but that idea that one of the reasons that, for me, one of the reasons that studying dinosaurs is so important is because it teaches us how science works, right? Mm-hmm. Because every time there's a new discovery or a new tool applied, a new find in the field, that might fundamentally change what we thought before. And as scientists, we just have to be willing to let go of ideas that have been proven wrong and move on to the new way of thinking and move on to the next discovery, right? So it's a really important way of kind of realizing that sort of like lack of egoism when it comes to a scientific discipline. You really just have to go with what the data say and accept that sometimes, maybe lots of times, you're going to be wrong. It's okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree with that. I am constantly amazed by what my colleagues in paleontology and geology have managed to figure out about the Earth, because our evidence, as Paul said, it's terrible. Actually, it's very fragmentary. It's been left out in the weather for tens of millions of years, and the fact that people have been able to put together such a rich story is incredible. I always think about a line that the comedian Jerry Seinfeld had, which was, we can't even figure out who killed JFK. Good luck with the dinosaurs. But we've made remarkable progress, and I think we're really making the progress in those areas between the fields. Those are the papers that are really exciting to read for me.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question of everybody? Maybe we can just do like a quick round robin. If you weren't a paleontologist, what would you be?
A detective.
I wanted to be a doctor, and so my road to paleontology actually started with trying to go back for a pre-med degree with 3 little kids. That didn't work so well.
You're a dino doctor, Mary.
Yes, right.
Actually, for me, I wanted to be a vet until I discovered that vets keep very antisocial hours and have to put their arms up to their shoulders inside cows. And both of those things really put me off the idea of being a vet.
I always say when I'm telling people about what I do, I say I'm like a veterinarian without the hope.
There you go. On the other hand, you can't hurt any of your customers. So
exactly, the malpractice insurance is a dream. Yeah.
There you go.
I would have been a musician. I was a musician. I actually was a professional musician. I took they call it a gap year now. Back when I was in college, they called it dropping out.
Mhm.
And I did that. I went out and played drums in California for a year. I came back. I was the house drummer at the Golden Nugget Casino in Atlantic City for a year. So that was my once and maybe future job after I retire from academia.
Well, very cool. No, I appreciate all this. And Hunter has decided he wants to participate. He usually practices each session. Gosh, he's hogging all the camera. So no, perfect. I want to thank all of y'all today for joining in. I can't tell you how much fun I've had, and I hope all of y'all have had fun as well. And again, I know with everything that's going on, just trying to juggle our own individual, COVID lives right now, giving up all of your valuable time to participate in this, I really appreciate it. And our local community really appreciates it as well. And I've been getting emails already, people who are watching, the event currently, because it is live, remember, who have enjoyed it so much. So that's good. We still have enough people who expressed initial interest. We're going to do at least one more of these. So again, anyone who's watching this out there and the paleontologists who want to be in one, just let me know. We'll get you set up. And again, this is recorded. So today we'll go through and get this posted on our YouTube page, and it'll be posted on the museum's website. So again, our website is greatplainsdinosaurs.org. And remember, if you have any questions, comments, liked it, didn't like it, things you think we should do differently or whatnot, you can email us anytime at dinosaur@itstriangle.com. I'm not going to clap because it was really weird just me being the only one clapping last time. I learned that. But imagine all of you panelists can hear a full audience of people clapping, and thank you. Thanks. So with that, I want to thank you all very much for this. It's been a lot of fun, and I greatly appreciate you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks.
Thank you. It's nice to see you all.
Good to see everybody.
Yeah.
Good to see everybody.
Stay
All right.
safe.
And with that, yes, everyone stay safe. Don't go cooped up too much with COVID, and we will all talk again soon. So thank you all again very much. I appreciate it.
Welcome.
Cheers.
Bye, everyone.